So yes, welcome again to this presentation. If you can't see the screen, then please send me a message, but hopefully you can all see the presentation on the screen. Like I said, it'll just be a 25-minute presentation with some question and answers at the end. And this is going to be for Food Waste Action Week that's on this week, just coming to the end of it. So I want to look at food waste as a whole, looking at the food industry, looking at how it impacts the three pillars of sustainability. And then the two running themes are going to be the main actions around food waste, sort of not creating food waste in the first place, and then if you do create food waste, then disposing of it in the correct way. So we'll start by looking at the big stage and the global and how it's a global issue, and then bring it right down to the UK and then into the offices and then into your homes and what you can do to help the situation. So we'll start with a doom and gloom bad picture, but then there'll be some light at the end about what we can do to make it better. So, like I said, we'll start by looking at the big picture. So the food industry is a global issue, it's a global function. So food waste is then by default a global issue. You think about the production of the food waste and how it's manufactured and made in agriculture, and then the transportation of that food waste or food, and then the consumption of it. And in all of these areas, waste is produced. And this has become even more prevalent over the last few weeks with the current war in Ukraine. I saw an article recently saying about how Ukraine and Russia produce a lot of Europe and the northern hemisphere's fertilizer that's used. And you can imagine we're coming into spring now, so this is the main time that fertilizer is used. And with the war currently going on, that distribution of the fertilizer is going to be very hard. And then Ross Atkins did, I think it was yesterday, he did one of his videos speaking about how a lot of wheat and a lot of the key grains that are used in the world are produced in these areas. And again, with the war that's going on, the distribution and the use of these is going to be severely hampered this season, and that just brings home the need to reduce our food waste as much as possible. And with that, you can look at food waste in how it impacts all three pillars of sustainability. So sustainability looks at the social, economic, and environmental impacts that something has. So if we look at food waste, for example, and there's just a few facts here, in society, there's over 800 million people in the world are hungry. But while that's a lot of people, we throw away 1.3 billion tons of food each year. And if we equate that to the amount of meals that can be ate, that's enough food to feed all those people who are hungry 4 times over. So it's a big societal issue with the amount of people that are hungry. It's also an economic issue. Worldwide households throw away around 13.8 billion pounds worth of food. And if we look at that in terms of households, on average, that means a household can save about 500 pounds a year to if they were to reduce their food waste. And then we look at the environment, which is maybe the area that gets the most focus, that and societal issues. With food, you're using a lot of land, you're using a lot of water, you're using a lot of fertilizer. Whenever food is disposed of, we are a zero to landfill organization. We send food to anaerobic digestion, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. But if food is sent to landfill, then it produces a lot of methane, and methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's 20 times stronger than CO2, and it's responsible for 6% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And you might remember in COP26 that happened towards the end of last year, one of the big global pacts that was made was to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. So reducing food waste and making sure food is disposed of in the correct way is a key element to reducing food waste, or to reducing methane, sorry. And then, so those are the kind of three pillars of sustainability. And then we've got the sustainable development goals. And Food waste and the food industry impacts a lot of these goals, but some of them you might not necessarily think they do. So the first one, zero hunger, that's obviously a direct relation to food waste. One of the key goals of SDG 2 is to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. But then if we look at the other SDGs, so clean water and sanitation, a lot of water is used to produce different crops, and this can often have a detrimental effect to the rest of the society and the people living in that area. So for example, in California, they're going through a very bad drought at the minute, and they produce a lot of almonds in California, and then that takes up a lot of water. Avocados got a bad rep a few years ago because of the amount of water it takes. So areas in Chile are going through drought because that's a lot of where avocados are from. And in the Dominican Republic, a lot of banana is produced there, and they're going through a bad drought at the minute because of the amount of water it takes to produce these items. And then sustainable cities and communities and responsible consumption, that's just about societies and cities not throwing away food and making sure that everyone in those cities and societies have enough to eat. Climate action, again, the emissions used, not just the methane in landfill, but also the actual production and that is it takes to produce this food that is eventually being thrown away. And then life below water and life on land, referring to overfishing or using land to produce food instead of it being returned to nature or being used for other things, not for food that's being chucked in the bin. So we've kind of looked at the broad spectrum of food waste and kind of looked at the global issue, but now we're going to look at a UK issue, because a lot of sustainability issues and what people see as sustainability issues, you often think, oh, that's an issue for someone else, or that's not for the developed world, that's more for the developing world. But food waste is a massive issue in the UK. Again, we've got some facts here. So in society, 8.4 million people in the UK are struggling to eat. And you might struggling to eat, it's hard to define that, but I think and 8.4 million in real terms, that's the population of London, are struggling to eat. Hard to define what struggling to eat means, but severely food insecure means that the food intake is greatly reduced and that the children regularly have actual physical sensations of hunger. And that's 4.7 million people in the UK have severe food or severely food insecure. And then if we look at the economics of that, so households cause around 70% of the UK's food waste and offices around 15%. But with UK households, they can save on average £60 a month if they reduce their food waste. And if you think about that in terms of offices and how much money is being wasted in purchasing that food and then also paying for the cost of disposal for that food, all that money will soon add up. And then in terms of the environment, so 3.6 million tons of food is wasted in the food industry every year. And if we think about, and 2 million tons of that is still edible. But if we look at that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that's about 25 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions produced by the food waste sector each year. In terms of the whole UK carbon budget, that's about 5.5% of the UK greenhouse gas emissions, which it's a fairly big chunk just on food waste. And if we look at that again, try and compare that, that's about half of the amount that the aviation industry produces each year in the UK. And we often hear a lot of talk about transportation and reducing your flights, reducing your air miles, but we don't often hear a lot about reducing the amount of potatoes that you buy or different foods that you're eating, and trying to reduce your carbon footprint through your diet just as much as your travel. So it's kind of an underrepresented thing. Another reason why it's a UK issue, if those reasons in terms of hunger and throwing money away and things aren't enough to take action on food waste, then for the soulless people who don't care about that, then there is the Environment Act that was passed at the end of last year. So the Environment Act is the first big bit of legislation around the waste industry for I think about 15 years. And it is going to make it compulsory for offices of more than 5 people to have food waste collections. So at the minute it's not compulsory, and in a lot of offices there is food waste, but in homes, especially in London, living in flats and things, there isn't a lot of food waste. About 50% of households in England don't have food waste collections. It is compulsory in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but in England it's not. But with this Environment Act, that will become law. So this act kind of paved the way for the legislation to be introduced. So we think it will become law probably this time next year is the current timeline for when that will happen. So I've painted a bit of a doom and gloom picture and kind of looked at all the issues and the negatives and things, but now we're going to try and look at some solutions. So it's a global issue, it's a UK issue, it's a client issue, and therefore it is a BPR issue as well. We are a waste management company that we collect waste, but we fundamentally want we have a huge sustainability and social value element to our business as core values that we have, and we want food waste to be reduced as much as it can, and we also want it to be disposed of correctly as well. So a lot of what we do is a lot of engagement with clients, and we don't just want, in theory, as a waste management company, the more waste we collect the better, but we don't see it that way. Like I said, we have those core values running through us. So in terms of engagement, we want businesses to have food waste streams. We want them to do that because that is in terms of the waste hierarchy, that is the best place for food waste to go. And often businesses think, oh, we don't produce that much food. But if you think about, just individually and personally, how much food waste you produce in office. So maybe you've bought a sandwich and you leave and you don't eat it all, or a salad and you have a little bit of food waste, or you get a too good to go bag and there's just one too many muffins in that for you to finish. Or you bring in lunch, but then you all decide to go out for lunch that day instead, and then you leave your sandwich in the fridge, and then a week later someone complains about a smell, and then you realize that you've left your egg sandwich in the fridge for the last week, and then you realize what happened to it. And if you think about that, and then you times that by your whole building, so whether it's 10 staff, 100 staff, 1,000 staff, you think about it as a whole building, you will that food soon adds up. And another thing around the waste industry, your waste statistics are all based on the weight of that waste. And with food, it's a very heavy waste. You think about how many plastic bottles you might have, but if you throw away a sandwich, that's going to equal a number of plastic bottles. So in terms of waste statistics, food, if it's disposed of in a food waste stream, can be recycled. If it's disposed of as general waste, then it'll be treated as general waste. So it's good for your statistics as well if you collect food separately and dispose of it correctly. So we like to introduce food waste streams, and then we want to make sure that the right things are going into the food waste bin. So we carry out audits in general waste bins and in your mixed recycling bins to see what's actually going in. And then through that, we can see if there's, let's say, half of your general waste bin is food, well, then we can then go on site and make changes to that. We also do visual checks on food waste. Normally, with in-office restaurants and back of house, we will see what they are producing. Maybe they're always producing lots of loaves of bread, and we can then speak with them and show them that this is how much extra bread you're throwing away. This can help you save on your costs in terms of purchasing that bread and making that bread, and then also the disposal costs of that bread. So we can do those waste audits, and then from that we tailor engagement things. So whether it be speaking to the back of house about what food waste you're producing, or going around the office, going around the building, looking at where the location of those food waste bins are. Are there any food waste bins in the T-point areas? Are there any food waste bins in where people actually have lunch, or is it just general waste bins? And making sure the office layout is correct. And then engagement, so like this presentation today, speaking with staff, doing lunch and learns, doing webinars with staff to really help them understand what can go in the food bin. In reality, what goes in the food bin is anything that you would put in your mouth, because it's the anaerobic digestion system is just a big stomach. So if you can go in your stomach, then you can put it in the food bin. And just making sure everyone's understands what's going on, because a big issue with waste and recycling in general, and particularly with food waste, and in particular food waste packaging, is a big issue. A lot of people ask us questions about food waste packaging. So we want to make sure people know what can go in the right bin. And with packaging, the messaging is quite unclear. So, you might have a pizza box that has got some grease on it, got some food on it. Can I put that in the bin? I've got a yogurt pot and I finished it. Can I put that in certain bins? So I want to try and dispel some rumors now and try and give some tips about what can and can't be recycled. With sort of paper food packaging, let's say like a pizza box, for example, if it's got grease on it or food on it, then the fibers that make up that cardboard packaging are going to be damaged, and therefore that can't be recycled. So if you think about a pizza box, normally the base of that pizza box is going to be all greasy. That should go in your general waste bin. But the top of your pizza box that probably hasn't had any food on it, you can rip that off and that can go into a mixed recycling bin. In terms of your pots, tubs, and trays, so like takeaway packaging or like a yogurt pot, for example, we want that to be as clean and dry as possible. Obviously, we know that we're inherently lazy as human beings, and we don't like to do anything extra that we don't need to. So what does clean and dry actually mean? Well, a general rule of thumb, we want it to be as clean and dry as possible, but a general rule of thumb is if you're happy to put it on top of your head and you're not going to get any ketchup or baked beans on top of you, then you can put that in the mixed recycling bin. But we also say that if you're in doubt, and wish cycling is a big issue, if you're in doubt about what can and can't be recycled, then we ask you to put that in the general waste bin. Now that might seem counterintuitive because you want to recycle as much as you can, but if you think about, let's say, a baked bean tin, and you've got half of that's got baked beans in it, you put that in your bin in the office. Okay, now that bin is covered in baked beans. All that good recycling is now contaminated, can't be recycled. That bin then gets put in the loading bay bin. Okay, now that loading bay bin is contaminated. Okay, I put that loading bay bin in the back of a vehicle. Okay, that vehicle is now contaminated. Okay, that vehicle then goes back to our facility and then gets put in the big pile of all the other recycling. Okay, now that pile can be contaminated. You might think that's won't happen because it's just a little bit of baked beans, but then if you extrapolate that and think about the whole office, then it's very easy to contaminate everything. So wish cycling is an issue around food and packaging in particular. So in the back of that image there is 100% compostable. So compostable packaging, in my opinion, has made the issue slightly worse. So you get terms such as 100% compostable, degradable, not plastic, biodegradable. And what do they actually mean? Well, if something's compostable, that means that it will break down into compost. Is basically what it means. Think of it the same way as you think is recyclable. If something says it's recyclable, that means it can be turned back into a new product. If something's compostable, then it can be turned back into compost. So but a big issue is that people think, oh, it's compostable, so that can go in my food waste bin. But think about compostable packaging and food in the same way that you think about plastic bottles and paper. They can both be recycled, but they are both recycled in different ways. Paper is sent to a paper mill and plastics is sent to a plastics reprocessing facility. With compostable packaging and food, compostable packaging is sent off to an in-vessel composting site and food waste is sent to anaerobic digestion. Now, you can put paper and plastic in the same bin. We like them to be separate. You can put them in the same bin, but with food and compostable packaging, because food goes absolutely everywhere, it's very hard. It's almost impossible to separate those two things later on the line. So they need to be separated at the source, which is generally in the office. So just to explain that further, with food recycling, where we send it, like I said, we don't send anything to landfill, we send it to anaerobic digestion. And what happens there is it gets sent to a big plant. And that food, as it decomposes and it turns into compost, it releases that methane, which I spoke about earlier, and heat and gas, and that can all be collected and then used to generate electricity. That biogas is then used to make electricity, and then that compost that is left at the end, it is then sent on to be used in the agricultural industry. With compostable materials, you don't have that element of biogas, and you don't have that renewable electricity element to it. It gets sent to an in-vessel composting site. It breaks down in a different way than food would break down. It takes a 6-week process. It breaks down, and then it gets, well, decomposes back into compost, and then it can be used in the agricultural industry. So those are kind of what happens to food waste when it becomes food waste. But what we're looking at now is how do you stop food waste becoming waste? We're working with a couple of partners at the minute, so Olio and Neighbourly, and they're organizations that you might have heard of, and there are others. These are two that we're working with that match up people who have excess food with people who either want or need the food. So whether it be a sandwich shop that has 10 sandwiches left over at the end of the day, you can then put them on these platforms, and then they will be redistributed to people who need them or want them. This is something that we're rolling out, and if it's something you think might be interesting for your business, then please let us know. And we also work with Fair Share. So Fair Share is a food redistribution charity, and what we do with them is for every food waste collection that we do, we donate 25p, which is equivalent to a meal for a vulnerable person, to Fair Share. Over the last 10 years, we've donated over £100,000 to this charity, and we also do volunteering days with them. So whether that just be staff, this is me just before Christmas and some colleagues helping them, or we can also do it with clients as volunteer CSR days to help redistribute the food to people who need them. And now we're going to speak about some tips and tricks and things. So things that actually you can do and you can take home and do in your office. So in the office, we tell people you got to report on your waste figures. You got to tell people how much waste they're producing. So the idea, waste out of sight, out of mind. People just put it in the bin. They don't really know what happens to it. They don't really care what happens to it because it's now not their problem anymore. But if you report on the waste figures and actually show people, look, we are throwing away tons worth of food, or we are half our general waste is food and is not being disposed of in the correct way, then that can ring home more to people, and then they can make the changes they need. And this is a lot better when it's peer to peer, and it's not, me coming in or someone else coming in telling other people what to do. People can get their backs up about that. It's a lot better when it's peer to peer engagement. We also encourage catering initiatives, whether this is, bring meat-free Mondays or bring in your lunch on Tuesdays or different things like that, but sort of company-wide catering initiatives to help encourage people to reduce their food waste. Some more practical things that you can do in your building is have a communal shelf to share food. So I personally find a lot of times where if I've brought my own food, but I don't have a sauce to go with it, then I need to buy a whole big bottle of sauce, but then I'm not going to use it all because I'm just having it for lunch today. So a communal shelf that's got different food things that either you can put on there, or a company can have things that are always in that shelf, and then people can just share it. Having an employee fridge to store that food, but then also having a freezer. So the idea of if you do bring in lunch, but then you decide to go out for lunch for that day, it might go off in the fridge, but if you have a freezer, you could put it in there, then it might stay a bit longer. You do still have that problem that you might forget about it though, and then in 6 months' time, you see a frozen egg sandwich in the freezer. And also to clean these things regularly. So often food waste can stay in there, but if you clean it regularly, then it also helps show how much food is being wasted. So if you clean it regularly and show your staff, okay, this is how much food is out of date and is being thrown away in the fridge this week, then again, that can bring home to people. Or, so the idea of stopping food waste become food waste, you can set up composting, or especially around coffee grounds, you can set up composting for staff to take home. Coffee bags are good for flower pots and home gardening. And you can implement that in the office as well. And then other things that you can take home that you can do in the office as well, but things that you can take home. So items that have a short shelf life, stick them at the front of the fridge. Don't put them in the back of the fridge where, again, you forget about them. Put them at the front of the fridge, so then you always see them and you always know, okay, I need to take that. I need to take that and eat that. Cook in bulk. Your freezer is your friend. Try not to fill your freezer with things that are there for years and years. Try and use that on a regular basis, and cook in bulk. And then when you do cook in bulk, label the food either with what it is, but also with when it was made. And then again, you can keep track and you understand your own cooking habits a bit better, and knowing what food you've got in the fridge. And then another tip about best before and use by date. So use by date, that is a definite date. You should use that food, you should eat that food by that date. But a best before date, that is a bit more lenient. So supermarkets cannot sell things after their best before date, but you can eat them. And a general rule of thumb is that it'll still have a third of its life left after the best before date has run out. So obviously that varies by different items, but you imagine it's still got a third of its shelf life left after you buy it. So you still have time. And reusable takeaway packaging. So when you go out for lunch, ask if you take your own Tupperware with you, ask if they can put that in your own Tupperware. That means you're obviously saving on the plastic that it takes to store that food, but it's also a lot easier to take that food home with you if you're not going to finish that food. It's a lot easier to take it home in a reusable Tupperware than it is in just the paper wrapping that they normally give it to you in. So try and use reusable Tupperwares whenever you go out for food. And then finally, we always try and finish with a sort of a call to action. So kind of be bold at work. There's a thing called a positive ambition loop, that the more that you do, it then encourages people around you to do more, which then encourages your office, your building, your company to do more, which then encourages the city to do more, which then encourages the government to do more, and so on and so on. So the more that you do, the more you go beyond compliance, the more you speak with colleagues, the more you drive change, then the bigger impact that you will have. And that's kind of all I have to say today about the food waste. So we've got time for questions afterwards, but just finishing with there is enough food in the world to go around and to wipe out global hunger. Like I said, there's 800 million people, but we can feed them 4 times over. And like I said, we often think that that sustainability issues aren't really our problem, but food waste is everyone's problem. The consequences of it impact all our lives, everyone's lives, but then also we are the solution to it all. We can each individually. We don't need to rely on other people to make the changes. We can personally make changes in order to be part of the solution to the problem as well.